We are joined by the Director of Analytics for Argonaut Hockey Group, a video analyst and analytics analyst for an OHL club, presently the staff writer for Blackout Dallas, staff writer for Flames Nation, quantitative and qualitative analyst for the Indigenous Hockey Research Network, and 1,000 other things. Nick Lacoste, thank you so much for joining us. He's also a Brock grad. I'll mention that again, from class of 2023. Nick, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Nick's going to be helping us on our journey through the introduction to scouting. You have selected this module because you might be interested in scouting yourself. You maybe selected this module because you didn't sign up in time when you were automatically assigned into this group. I'm not sure. Who knows why you're here, but maybe you have a passion for scouting. Maybe it's hockey. Maybe it's basketball. Maybe it's baseball. Maybe it's soccer. It doesn't matter. The principles that we're going to be instructing you in this module are widely applicable. Okay, I'll keep saying that over and over again. Yes, Nick has a specific expertise in hockey, and a lot of what we're going to be telling you about is specific to hockey, but the practices, the advice that Nick is giving you about how to build plans and how to approach sample size, this is true in every single sport. There is nothing unique about hockey in that regard. The minutia, sure. I mean, there's some stuff about hockey that's different, strides and shot release and all these types of things that you're going to be looking at. That's unique to hockey, absolutely. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't really care about hockey, if you're able to demonstrate that you have a scouting background in general, it is possible to go across sports. It happens very, very, very frequently. I can think of two examples right off the top of my head here with people from Brock who scouted in both. One of them was basketball and hockey. The other was soccer and hockey. It's a skill. It's a skill that you can learn. And the first thing I'll say when we're talking about scouting is barriers to entry to scouting. It's something that Nick and I talk about frequently. And it's the idea that what does it mean to be a scout? So Nick, you meet scouts all the time. I'm sure, in the rink, you've been talking with scouts, you see it all the time. What's the sort of background of a scout? How varied are their backgrounds when you meet them?
A scout can be anybody off the street or a former general manager of a pro sports team. It can be a range from anybody to anybody. Being a scout and titling yourself as a scout comes from any background at all. And the fact that it's sort of like a notion that you can't be a scout if you haven't done something already it's pretty annoying for people like us going through sport management programs thinking that we can never be a scout in life. So personally, coming through the Brock Sport Management program and hoping to work in something hockey related or sport related in the scouting or analytics angles, it's been frustrating to see sort of this inferred barrier that just because I didn't scout when I was 12 doesn't mean it means that I can't do it now.
I mean, that's a great point, right? And the point about the backgrounds is just remarkable. You will literally see in this very market right now, if you look at the scouting staffs in the OHL, you're going to find former NHLers. You're going to find former first round picks in the NHL. You're going to find 65-year-old gentlemen who've been working in the industry for 40 years. You're going to find people that are Brock graduates that are just sort of and you're going to find people with some very good last names who have very good connections. Okay. So you're going to find some very famous nephews. You're going to find some very famous grandsons. Okay. Not to delegitimize anyone's place here, but it is a very, very, very broad sort of spectrum of experience that you're going to find in this industry. And again, nobody has the ability to tell any one person sitting in this classroom or any other classroom here that they can't be a scout, can't be a GM, can't be anything, right? We have too much of a sample size to suggest that it is possible. So again, if this is something you're interested in, whether it's hockey or any other sport, one of the most important things is to just not be discouraged right off the bat. That would be something I would learn, not myself, certainly not as through scouting, but by seeing it through so many of our graduates, right, Nick? Not being discouraged seems to be an important part of this.
Absolutely. The passion and the initiative that you can take during your Brock Sport Management degree is something that I definitely was proud that I did. Is that I went to rinks by myself. Sometimes I decided, I want to scout, I want to try this out, even though I had never done it before. Besides like a bit in high school, I was curious about what is it. I asked some friends who had more experience in it, and I learned from them. I took tips from some of my bosses in the sporting world, and throughout all of that, I learned sort of how to form my scouting identity, you could call it. But it all took just sort of putting your foot out there and sort of blocking that door from getting closed on you.
Right. And that's, again, in future modules, Nick's going to show you how to build a scouting plan, what to look for with players. But right off this top, I mean, you're looking at scouting right now as maybe an industry that you're interested in getting into. Maybe it feels a little scary. Maybe it feels like you don't belong there because you're not an AHLer yourself. And everything that Nick just told you there is important. I mean, you've got time here now. You're in possibly your third year, possibly your fourth year here at Brock. There's still time while you're at Brock. One of the ways that I would imagine doing this as well is if you don't have a team that's asking you to scout players on their behalf, you have free access to the entirety of U Sports hockey while you're here at Brock. Those games are free to you as a student. And the quality of play, I've said this to you a million times in this course, the quality of play in U Sports hockey is the most consistently slept on in this entire country, probably in North America. You're dealing with extremely gifted athletes there. So if you don't have any sort of team asking you to do it, you can always go there and practice scouting yourself at U Sports games. Just start doing it, get your feet wet. But let's talk broadly today about what scouting is. We've already started about barriers to entry and things like that. Well, I'll take you on a little bit of a journey when it comes to the sort of value of scouting historically and where we've come, because we are in a vastly different world that Nick Lacoste has inherited here and that you are inheriting right now, that it used to exist. Now, we talked about this world as being kind of closed off to many of you, and it feels very, very secretive and very secluded. Well, it used to be even worse than that. I mean, certainly scouting has a direct one-to-one correlation with a very uniquely North American institution, and that would be the draft. Drafting and scouting are two things that are incredibly related. That's not to say sport that don't have draft don't scout. They do. But again, the draft is this central sort of choke point in which all scouting analysis runs through. And that's an extremely important thing to understand, that if you're dealing with an ambition to want to become a scout, in North America, there's a chance that you're going to have to deal with this notion of a draft. So this means that everything that you're looking at, every sort of aspect of player analysis is going to filter through birth years and cohorts and peer groups based on these draft years. Because, so for instance, Nick, I'm sure you deal with a specific age group that are in preparation for a specific type of draft, perhaps a bantam draft, for instance, in the OHL. Does that sound about correct?
Yep, absolutely. There are a lot of vested interests around when I'm working with these kids and everything. So it's definitely something that you have to consider and sort of be mindful of, that these kids, probably all of them, most of them at least, will want to reach a certain goal, whether that be to get drafted or to make an OHL team in the future if they're coming from Ontario, for example, in the U16 programs.
Great point. And as such, you are going to be dealing with an industry that, again, by the end of this course, I'm probably walking into, you already know the draft is an imperfect predictor of success. It is not the be all end all. It is not the only measurement of whether or not players are going to be successful. But however, it is an opportunity for you as someone who's looking to become a scout to sort of demonstrate your value to an organization. But historically, if you go back many, many years, drafts have been a method by which we can sort the value of players born in a certain year. That's it. That is all that they are designed to do. They are not designed to be crystal balls. They are designed to sort of evaluate peer groups very specifically in terms of their ages and their performance relative to people in their age group. Now, if you're a fan of another sport, if you're a fan of football or a fan of baseball, you know that the peer group there is different. You're going to be, or basketball as an example. In a draft year, for instance, in the professional ranks, you're dealing with drafts that have 22-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 18-year-olds and people from Europe who are 21. In baseball, you're dealing with an international free agent pool where you can get signed at 14, and college players who are 23, 24, 20, 19, who knows, right? Hockey is different. This is a course about the hockey industry. It is very specifically about people born within a certain draft year. That doesn't mean that you can't have overagers, and in some cases in pro drafts, you do. But it is very unique in this way, and hockey is very, very, very concerned with how you compete with a certain peer group that is assigned by seemingly arbitrary birth months that have very important impact for your professional career. But as we went over the professional structure of professional hockey section earlier in the course, you can see that this peer group that you are aligned with follows you for many, many, many years afterwards. So when Nick's working with an OHL team, he's dealing with a specific peer group of players. What are their ages that you're generally dealing with, Nick?
Most of them are 15 years old.
15 years old. So we're looking here broad-based here. Understand that if, and again, Nick's had to work really hard to get to a point in which you can look at 15-year-olds playing hockey. But that's sort of the point here, is that once you're there, you're dealing with 15-year-olds who are going to be eligible for this is an OHL draft. They call it the Bantam draft still? I can't remember. What do they call it that?
I believe so. Yeah. OHL draft. Yeah.
OHL draft, right?
Yeah.
And they will continue on a cohort throughout their OHL careers. And maybe this won't be the last time that they're drafted. Maybe they get drafted into the NHL, but we are talking about fractions of those OHL draftees will make their way into an NHL draft board at any point in their lives. But the point is this, I mean, it's not so much about understanding that you're responsible for tracking the future history of the NHL when you're just starting out here. It's about evaluating in a fair sense a group of people with their peers. That is essentially the best I can describe the job of the scout in general. Now, the value of scouting today is something that I think it has exploded as an industry and as something that we can do. With the fact that we can talk about it in this sense in a classroom like this demonstrates how wide ranging it was, because traditionally it was literally reserved for the ex-player who would become a scout and would just sort of sit in hockey rinks for the rest of their sort of young adult lives, and they would play out their string with hockey in this kind of world. The fact that it's open to students like yourself, to students like Nick, demonstrates how it has opened up. But Nick, how would you articulate the value of scouting to the teams that you work for and to National Hockey League teams more broadly?
The value of scouting today, especially for young people, I think it's a really good relationship to have. Being sort of in the university age or the teenagers, being able to relate to other teenagers while we're scouting them, I think is a huge piece to the value of scouting today. If you think of someone with a lot of experience, what does that scouting experience allow you to do? Well, you've been able to watch thousands of games. Maybe you're a retired and ex-NHLer, for example. You have the ability that you said, I was on the ice with some of the best players in the world at one point in time. But do you know what the 15-year-olds today are going through? Are you aware of the systematic approach that Canada has sort of made their junior system into, where you have to be a certain age, you follow your youth, 13, 14, 15, 16, then you get drafted or you don't. Then you play in certain leagues or you play in the top leagues. You have to follow this pattern no matter what interests you have. And otherwise you have to sort of like leave the country and pursue newer systems such as the American growth of their junior program, for example. So I think the fact that sort of the younger generations are more open to sort of the value of scouting today, and the idea that these players are going to be having difficult decisions that they're making as hockey players. So we have to understand that they're playing in high stress environments already by being in the Triple A's and all the top leagues in the world, but they're also dealing with the idea of, am I going to be able to play in college, or am I going to play in the OHL, for example? So I think that being in a stressful generation, unfortunately for us as students going through university and things like that, I think it's very easy to relate to those kind of kids, where some people that maybe are a little older might just see them as just hockey assets, where we can sort of relate more to that.
What a great piece of knowledge there, Nick. That's fantastic. Because there, your inexperience is a feature and not a bug, right? There is something that you lean into that. You say, like, look, I might not have 40 years of experience, but I do understand better the social media pressure of having to basically be your own agent when you're a young player. The idea that you can move around between associations and cities, and the idea that you need to basically be marketing yourself and trying to create Instagram reels even of yourself at a very young age. You see this often in basketball as well, this sort of like mixtapes that come out of 10-year-olds playing basketball, and you're like, oh my goodness gracious. But in hockey, I appreciate what you're saying here, where, you know, like someone who's played 40 years, or sorry, let's say someone who's played 10 years in the NHL, those first 2 years after they've retired, yeah, they've got a lot of knowledge as a pro scout. You say, I know that guy. I played with him. I know this. I know this exact coach's system. But every year that goes by, your value then erodes. And yes, if you've made a bunch of decisions along the way that demonstrate that you have an ability to sort of think critically and be a sound judge of hockey character, then you're going to be fine. But many scouts who rely on their own personal experience might have a very short time in this industry because, yeah, okay, their relevance is only as long as they literally know and they have the cell phone numbers of the people that they've played with, right? So you see that. So in many ways, the sort of, Jeopardy kind of inverts here, where you have the ability at first, you don't have very much experience, you don't have very much sort of keeping you in the game. But the longer you stick around, the more you demonstrate yourself to be capable, the less you have to worry about becoming irrelevant, which is, I think, is another thing you're mentioning here, Nick, is if you refine your skill set early on and you can relate to players, you can sort of get your foot in the door and then demonstrate your value and stick around afterwards. But to finish our discussion here, this has to do with, again, a lot of what you maybe perhaps got people interested in scouting is the sort of industry of prospects and trades and first round picks and junior tournaments and all of these sort of things that have become part of the prospect industry in hockey more broadly. I often describe it as the sort of prospect industrial complex we have right now, where every single summer that goes by, we sort of obsess over the draft and obsess over trades that are made into the future. And this is not just a thing in hockey; it's a thing across many sports. But this has led perhaps to an over scouting or a bias that has been developed in favor of certain tournaments or types of draft picks. And how does, in a broad sense, how do scouts avoid that type of bias when you're evaluating potential pro prospects or potential amateur prospects?
What comes up often, in my opinion, is the sample. We're looking at some players who might play 50 to 60 games in their, or maybe even like just 30 games in their junior or pre-junior days. And then they're going to play at these national tournaments, which may be a weekend, it may be a week, it may be like the World Juniors, which is one of the most uh, it's quite represented well in the media, you could say. It's one of those tournaments that we look at as sort of like the pinnacle of junior hockey in a sense, where like if you don't do well there, you might not do well ever. But I think couldn't be farther from the truth. There are times and personal situations that can get in the way, and teams that are going to be overcrowded with certain players, play styles, coaches, new faces, new chemistry needed to be found in just a short time. These tournaments that take players out of their natural environments and put them into new environments might show off who the best adapters are, but they might not show who the best genuine players are, who may need a little more time to sort of evolve into a team player in the sense that at a young age.
That's a great point. And honestly, again, some of these tournaments are also awesome at telling us things we probably already know, which is who the most amazing players are. Which is generally, if you're going to be a scout, um, I don't think there's many people that needed to scout Connor Bedard too many times and Connor McDavid too many times. We kind of have a sense of who's going to be at the top of these things. Your job is not necessarily to figure out who the best in any peer group is. You can almost sometimes do that by just looking at the numbers on the page. If players are doing 3 points a game and then bantam hockey, that's not really the job of the scout, is to say what is essentially and many times self-evident. It's about trying to find differences among very similar groups of players or players that have never even played against each other one time. These tournaments can give opportunities to do that, but we oftentimes maybe put too much faith in some of these tournaments, some of these opportunities, and I'm sure that that's true. The lower you go down, I'm sure that there are major tournaments that you're scouting, Nick, in terms of bantam tournaments and things like that that occur and that are over a weekend. And again, if that's your only viewing, I mean, again, is that a fair representation of that player's time? Probably not, but overall, I think we got a good sense here of what the job of the scout is. I mean, it's evolved so much. I mean, I remember when the Buffalo Sabres moved to a primarily video scouting model for their pro scouting, it shocked people, absolutely shocked and horrified people. I'm not sure if that's still the way that they do things now, but you're living in a video scouting world for the most part. And many of you who are going to become scouts or want to become scouts are going to do a lot of video scouting. We're going to take you through how to do that and what some best practices are a little bit later on in this course. But it used to be a very, very, very small reserve. I mean, in terms of drafting, way back in the NHL, there used to be territorial rights, meaning that players were only eligible to be drafted by teams in their own geographic area. Imagine how easy your job would be as a scout then. You don't have to worry about players in the sort of radius around your city. Awesome. Things are a little bit different now. Now you're scouting players young, 12 years old, 13 years old, sometimes younger. You're having players that sort of that are scouting for themselves. They're reaching out to scouts on their own behalf. They're doing all sorts of things. It's a massively large industry now that used to be the purview of let's say 20 interested parties from across the country in the 1940s and 50s. So we've come a long way. It's a brave, scary world, but Nick is going to help you through it here, and we're glad that you've chosen this module for scouting. Nick, thank you so much for your time. We'll have you back again soon.
Thanks for having me.